All right, welcome back to Be the Standard. I'm your host, Denny Paul, and I'm here as always with my best friend, Mike Burns. And so before we get started, as always, take a look at the canvas. You can see it at this point. You know where to follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and we are on Spotify, Rumble, and YouTube. So check us out, all those places. Please like, please subscribe. And, for our first topic today, I thought, in the spirit of, just trying something new, we could talk about the debt ceiling and abortion and gun control. So,
see, Rip doesn't like that
Rip
at all.
said no. Rip said no. So we're gonna stick to the basics.
Yep,
all right.
what you know.
So we're gonna listen to Rip on this one. We're not gonna go politics. We're gonna go with something that we know a little bit more about, which is we're gonna talk a little bit about motivation and discipline, how they coexist, what makes them different, and how to implement those things into your life. Really, I was gonna say your daily life, but it's tough to be motivated every single day. It's tough to hold on to your discipline every single day. But that is the idea. The idea is to implement those things and ultimately become better. So with that, the reason I wanted to, talk about this, because I think a lot of times people, they get confused by these two topics or these two ideas of, motivation and discipline. And, I just think the most important thing to point out is that they're both very important components of, they're both components of how to implement change and positive change into whatever it is you're looking to do, whether it be the gym, whether it be your personal life or professionally. Motivation ultimately gets you going, and discipline ultimately, in my opinion, drives results. So
Something like that.
In my personal opinion, I think that, discipline is more important to, your long-term success. But I think that motivation is ultimately, it's necessary to get you started, right? You have to have some type of motivation to kind of, get you going. And what I always like to say is, motivation just, it gets your ass out of whatever chair it's in, right?
Right.
And it gets you moving. So, real quick, I mean, if you want to give your thoughts on that, I'm curious to know what you think.
Yeah. So, I mean, as people know, motivation is very temporary. It doesn't last very long. So if you don't have discipline behind it, you're never going to stick with what you're trying to do. So motivation, like I like how you said it, kind of get you moving. But what if you put what processes have you put after that to keep the discipline going to make sure it keeps moving? Because you're not going to be motivated every day. It's impossible. So it's
Right.
You can. One day you're super motivated. We see it all the time around New Year's, right? Like the New Year's resolutions come out. They have no plan past when that motivation wears off, and that's where discipline comes in.
Right. And I posted something on Instagram maybe 2-3 months ago, and I got a little pushback from somebody who, it's a friend's girlfriend, and so we kind of get into like, it was actually ended up being a great discussion. It wasn't like a debate. It wasn't,
Good.
obviously very nice to each other, but I got some pushback on that because obviously my post was more geared towards, motivation doesn't last. Discipline is ultimately what drives results. And, that conversation with her is kind of one of the reasons I wanted to get into this topic and kind of dive a little bit deeper with perhaps some research behind it. So that's what I did. I went in, I dug a little deeper, I did some research, but, in the spirit of this thing, we'll start with maybe some definitions, right? So what is motivation? It's the reason that a person has for acting in a particular way. For an example, I do this podcast because I think it helps people. But that's the goal, right? The goal is for us to be helping people. And, with the amount of feedback that I've received so far, I find that to be true. So I feel like I have a reason to stay motivated in doing what I'm doing. So,
Yeah, because you're getting feedback from that motivation sometimes. Again, not to go off, but what if you don't get that feedback? Sometimes that's where discipline comes in to keep you going towards the unknown, because you're not always going to get that. Like you got to drive towards something hard, and for a very long time to get results. And sometimes, a lot of the times, motivation, like you're not going to get that feedback right away, and you might not get it ever till the end. We get to the result, so it's good.
Or the feedback you're going to get is going to cause you to be less motivated.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Right? So
the negative feedback, which you're sure to get.
Yeah, so and I'm shocked. Like I've gotten constructive criticism, but nothing negative.
It's
yet.
coming.
Of course, it's coming. Bring it. I mean, I want it all. Like I want to know everybody's thoughts, good, bad, and different. So
I feel like we're not doing a good job, Denny, if we're not getting it yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I feel like when people start taking notice and then they start, trying to chop you down, that's when we start getting it.
Good. Let's stand by for that.
Yeah.
So back to definitions, right? Discipline. What's the definition of discipline? It's the practice of training yourself to obey a particular set of rules or a particular code of behavior. That's the scientific definition, and I don't know how to put it any better than that, unless you do.
Oh.
But I think one of the most significant traits or characteristics to discipline is delayed gratification. I think you have to have that in conjunction with discipline to ultimately get, results. And my biggest example of that, or greatest example of that for myself personally, is, I've been working out since I was 18 years old, so 23 years. So I've been working out, or I started working out thinking that I could look and feel a certain way, right? I didn't know I would, but it took 23 years of discipline to now be 41 and feel and look, even better than I did when I was 21, 23, 25, So discipline is all about, in my opinion, that delayed gratification and understanding that you put the time in, you put the reps in, you put the work in, the results will ultimately be there waiting for you.
Yeah.
So when it comes to motivation, there's two types of motivation. There's intrinsic motivation, which ultimately what this is when you're motivated to do things based off of your enjoyment. So you might, like for me, I get motivated to go play golf on Saturday because it's something I like to do. I get motivated to, go to the gym because it's something I like to do. Mm-hmm. So that's intrinsic motivation. It's kind of like self-motivation.
Did you always like the gym, though, or is that something you grew to like? Do you remember?
So, yeah, well, I started when I was 18, and I started just because I wanted to be a better athlete, and I wanted to just be in shape, and, you're young, you want to look good, get girls, all that. So that's why I started, but I didn't always love it. But once I got into it and started seeing the results, I haven't. That's why I haven't stopped in over 20 years. I haven't always been motivated to go to the gym or like the gym. Or how about you?
Good question.
You've been at this a while. You own 2 gyms, like.
Yeah. No. So I mean, obviously, I love fitness. But the traditional gym wasn't really for me. I would do it for a month or two, and I would lose that motivation, like you were just talking about. I would be like, that motivation would go away. I was drawn more towards like high intensity stuff, and that's kind of what's kind of kept me on it for many, many years now. Use that word CrossFit. Here it goes again.
Say, what do they call that high intensity stuff? Yeah. What is that?
Yeah. So CrossFit is what's held my attention, and obviously I didn't grow to love that. I loved it right from the start, and I've been doing it since.
Yeah, I mean, when I did CrossFit like overseas, when we really got into it, when we started, I should say, I liked it a lot. But it was never like I'm in love with it. I always felt good after doing it.
Yeah, you do.
You always do feel good. Because you can't argue with the fact that you just did something hard and you did something in the work. You put the work in. It's not like walking around lifting weights where you can kind of fake it if you need to. CrossFit's at least for me, I don't have an off button, so I just go all out, as you know.
Yeah, I know.
But it's just different. It's just very different, and there's nowhere to run. There's nowhere to hide.
Well, you could. I mean, there's some workouts you could, but that's one thing I love about CrossFit is that it trains you. You can train the mental piece just as hard as you can the physical piece, and you get to points in those workouts pretty quick. Sometimes you're like, oh man, I want to slow down or I want to stop, and then if you learn to push through those little barriers, you can use that lessons learned from that to do that in the real world. And I've always kind of said that when I coach athletes and I coach our members. I'm like, listen, like take what the mental toughness that you're learning through these workouts, the little lessons that you learn through these workouts, and apply them outside of the gym. That's why I love it. I love it. Anything hard, where you have to overcome, it always kind of burns a little lesson in the brain, and you can always use it for something else.
Yeah, and I've heard it said in the military something like your body will do 50% more or 20% more than what your mind thinks it will.
Yeah.
So when you can put that into practice and those types of workouts, it does translate into other areas of life. And if one thing I did notice when I was going to the CrossFit gym, and I went for like 3-4 years, whatever it was, a lot of the people that do CrossFit are like highly successful people, like doctors and, people that have, put a lot of science behind, or like people that really understand the science behind CrossFit as well. And they do the research and the homework.
Yeah. I mean, one correlate I definitely find, and I was actually thinking about this today, it's funny you brought that up, is I feel like a lot of people are just good people who are in there. You don't find a lot of douchebags, you know what I mean? Of course they exist, but there's just not a lot of them. It's people that like to challenge themselves typically are good people. Obviously you have the outliers, but
it's like anything else. I mean, shitbags are going to find their way into just about anything.
Yeah.
So that's the first part, or first type of motivation, is the intrinsic motivation, but then there's the extrinsic motivation, which is the things that motivate you, like externally, like money, power, position. Like an example of that for me is like politicians, right? They use they're driven by the ability to hopefully to make change, but really it's all about power.
Yep.
And then somebody like myself who's in sales, the majority of my motivation there is, I like what I do, which is nice, but I'm financially motivated because I don't really have a choice but to be. But anybody in sales, you have your salary, you have commissions on top of that, and you don't work for your salary, you work for what you can make on top of that. So that's an example of just those extrinsic motivations, is just the things that are driving you or motivating you outside of just pure enjoyment.
That's good stuff.
Yeah. And I think that most people, when it comes to, motivation, I think most people are, motivated extrinsically, right? If you think about it, and this is the example, I actually just came up with this. I came up with this myself, just, reviewing for this when we're going to talk about this episode. And it was like, if you told somebody, right, that, and this is why discipline's so important. If you told somebody that if you do X, Y, and Z over the next 2 weeks, you'll get $1 million. They're gonna do every single thing you tell them for those 2 weeks, and they're not gonna stop. They're not gonna waver. They're not gonna let anything stop them from getting in the way of that $1 million and what they're looking to accomplish, right? But people don't want to trust in that discipline, that without the instant gratification or without the end result in sight. Right. They don't want to, commit themselves to a process that they've implemented and follow that process and take the right actions, without knowing that $1 million is waiting for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, they lack faith, right? I mean, faith in just like, they don't, hey, if you do this, this will happen. If people don't see it, they don't do it. And it has to be very short term. Like, you can get people to do, fitness programs. That's why I hate fad fitness programs. I really don't like them for people that are not, they don't have a base of fitness already, because, like, and I'm going to throw it out there, I'm sure, there's a lot of people who love 75 hard. I think that's good for somebody that already has a high level of discipline. But you take somebody from the couch and throw them in 75 hard, you're taking all these habits you're trying to instill rather on these people, and they'll do it for 70 because they know 75 days. They'll do it. They'll absolutely do it. And then after that, what do they maintain? Hardly any of them. You know what I mean? Unless they already had a high level of discipline already, and they had some of those habits already. That's why I'm a big believer in instilling habits over time, right? So they become just part of who you are. But you want to do one at a time for most people. Like, of course, we talked about in our previous episode, you have outliers like David Goggins, who's just a maniac, you could just throw all those things at him at once, and I think he'll maintain some of them. But you take the average Joe off the couch and you say, hey, I want you to do 75 hard with me, and they'll probably do it, and they'll probably get great results. But the end goal is how many you want them to maintain those habits long term. How many of those habits do you think they'll maintain? And probably none of them.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree with that completely. And just, motivation itself, it's just isn't constant and it fluctuates. It's constantly, your level of motivation is constantly up, it's constantly down. And since it's not constant, it it has an adverse effect on, your productivity and ultimately your goal attainment. And I think that's exactly what you were getting at there is, you know, motivation fails, discipline is important, but people kind of, a lot of people, and I think obviously I've done it in the past with probably certain things and, where I've started something and quit on it, but you don't, if you don't have that end result, and it's not staring you in the face, it's like it's hard to stay on top of it. And
Yeah.
like you said, faith is important to that. But I just think that, how many people have you heard say, I need to get motivated to start working out again?
Mm-hmm.
You own a gym and people have probably said that to you 1,000 times.
A lot, yeah.
And I've had people say it to me because people who know I work out, like, oh, I got to get motivated to start working out again. Like, what goes through your mind when you hear that?
I mean, you don't want to go after somebody for saying that, but you know that you just got to just start showing up and like creating those habits. Again, like some of the best advice I've ever seen with that is trying to get people to go to the gym is literally just get in the habit of one day just drive to the gym. Even if you just walk in, maybe if you go to the parking lot, and then you turn around and go back home. Next time, like tomorrow, you go back. Maybe you step inside. You know what I mean? And it takes a while to build the habit. That's where the discipline comes in, and then eventually. That's what it becomes part of what you do. But if motivation, if you wait for that, you might be waiting a long, long time.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
And that's why I wanted to see what you'd say there, because every time somebody says that to me, my answer is exactly the same. I'm just like, do it.
Yeah. Don't wait.
Do it. And I've talked about this before when I used to work at Oracle about an hour away. I'd get out there early. I'd get up early every day, go to work, or go to the gym first, then go to work. But it was like, I wasn't motivated to do that. It was discipline. So I did it. And people would be like, Danny, I don't know how you do that. And I'm just like, I do it. I just do it. There's plenty of days where I hate doing it, but I just do it. And, that kind of brings us to, we talked a lot about motivation there and discipline spilled into it. But I'm going to hit on discipline a little bit more in depth right here with, ultimately, the textbook definition for discipline is, consistency and commitment to action despite whatever fluctuations take place with your motivation. And that's exactly what I was just talking about with going to the gym in the morning before work. I didn't count on motivation to do that. You've done a million things, I'm sure, that you weren't motivated to do, but you were disciplined to do.
Yep.
As far as, I think in order to instill discipline, I think you have to have solid habits.
Yeah.
Create solid habits. And I think, that ultimately translates to discipline. And that's why I set that as one of our second key principle, just of what we're looking to accomplish here.
Yep. Yeah. Just like I keep saying, like you got to have, discipline. You should start with easy habits to be able to build the discipline over time. I mean, especially if you lack discipline, you need to put a reward system at the end of everything you want to do. You know what I mean? Unless you're a maniac, and some people can just do the hard things all the time, but most people just won't do that. So if you give yourself a task, like I'm going to go to the gym today, but at the end I'm going to delayed gratification. Then I'll have my coffee. That's a great thing to look forward to. If you put it on the other end of that, and like, oh, well, I went to the gym, but I get this coffee, and it's reinforcing in your brain that this is a good thing, and to keep doing it. You know what I mean? So I'm a big believer in that. Putting the reward system, any kind of reward system, doesn't matter what it is. Obviously, you don't want it to be counter what you're trying to accomplish, but yeah. So
yeah, I think the best part about discipline is that it can be cultivated and implemented by anybody.
Absolutely.
Like anybody can do it. Obviously, I can't go dunk a basketball if I want to go dunk a basketball, but there's certain things that there are realistic goals that I can set for myself.
Denny's a lot shorter than me, and I bet he gets a lot closer than I do. This kid, no ups. No.
Yeah, but like there are plenty of things that if you set realistic goals, I mean, anybody can cultivate it and implement discipline, into whatever it is they're looking to accomplish. And I think that's kind of one of the coolest things about it is that you can do that. Like anybody can do it. And it's just necessary to, for long-term success and goal attainment. Like you can't, I told the story about, going back to school and getting the job at Oracle and the 2-year process that took. And it took a lot of discipline to go to school for, 2 straight years, summer, winter, all of that. And then also be working 6 days a week and,
That's awesome. It's a great story.
It's just, but again, it takes discipline and it took solid habits. I want to know your. I hear a lot of people talk about routines. Mm-hmm. I want to know your thought on routines. Like, do you think a routine is necessary to accomplish what it is that you're looking for?
Define what you mean. I just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing.
And make sure that and you can even check me on this if you need to. But for me, what a routine is, or what it means, is that you're doing the same things over and over, day after day. Mm-hmm. And this is what you need to do in order to accomplish your goals. So if you miss a part of your routine, your day's just fucked.
So that's why I love Alex Ramosi. He talks about that. He's the anti-routine guy because especially nowadays, it's just unbelievable. You read some of these books, you go on some of these podcasts or just some of these Instagram accounts, and you got to wake up, immediately go take a cold plunge, and then you got to read 3 pages of a book and then get sun in your eyes, and you got to do all these crazy things to get your day started, and before you know it, you're already exhausted. I think it depends on the person, and I definitely don't think you need all those things, obviously, but I feel like if you put yourself into a position where you need to do those things to be successful, what if you're in a place where you can't do them? Then how do you succeed? How do you go and do those things you're supposed to do? So I think routine, to a point, that's why I wanted you to define that. Like, I think it depends, right? So if you get up and I'm going to do, I don't know, again, like I'm going to make sure I do something hard before I have my coffee, or delay gratification, something like that. I think that's good. But I think if you need to have X, Y, and Z when you get up in order to be successful, I think that's going to be handicapping you long term, I think.
Well, I think for a couple of reasons, right? Like, if you're dependent on a routine and doing the same thing every single day, if things don't align exactly how you expect them to, it's going to throw you off.
Right.
Like you're used to waking up every single day and doing whatever. You wake up that day and like that whatever's not there. You're like, oh, wait a second. Like, I feel like people get thrown off by that. And, in addition to the comment of like, oh, I need to get motivated to work out, I hear a lot of, oh, I need to get back into the routine. I need to get back into my routine. And the reason you're not in the gym anymore, or you're not doing what you need to do or want to do or whatever, is because we're dependent on a routine. You didn't make it a habit. So a habit's different, in my opinion. This is just my own perspective. You don't need to have a routine where you're doing the same things at the same time every single day. But you do need to have a habit where, if it's important to you, you need to do it every day.
Right.
If you can't make it to the gym at 8 o'clock every morning, but you can get there at 3:30, that's fine. But you're doing what you said you were going to do.
Right. So at some point, though, it no longer is a habit. It becomes a character trait of yours. So you do a habit long enough, it becomes just who you are. And that's what you want, right? You want to have a habit for a very long time. And then eventually, like you do now, like there's no way you're not going to go to the gym anymore, barring an injury or something like that. That's just become who you are because you've done it long enough. So I really feel that's just the way,
Yeah, and those are kind of my personal habits of, some personal habits that I have where I implement that discipline just routinely, right? Gym 5-6 days a week. Now it's very limited alcohol consumption.
Crushing it.
And then, read the Bible. Those are like the 3 big ones for me. Like, I don't need to do them at the same time every day. Like, obviously alcohol doesn't fall into that. But like, as far as the gym and the Bible, like I don't have to do those at the same time every day, but they got to get done. So I don't know. I understand that people's schedules, the way they work, like a routine is necessary. But what happens when life throws a curveball and you can't, you can't adhere to that routine?
Yeah, life's always going to challenge your
That's
routine.
why I don't like routines, though.
Yeah, I mean, some people we are creatures of habit, right? So, but I think it's good to you can have your routines, but be flexible, be able to know if I don't have this thing, that I'm still going to get what I want done and still be able to execute on my task for the day.
Yeah. You know, we talked about motivation, discipline, and now we're going to talk about a little bit the relationship between the two. And it goes back to what I said just a little bit earlier, you know, where, you know, motivation gets your ass out of whatever seat it's in, and then discipline's kind of the vehicle that drives results. I would say that, you know, in it differently put, you know, motivation initiates action and discipline sustains it. You know, there's zero chance that you're always going to be motivated to take action.
No.
You know, discipline ultimately is the tool to, I don't know, maybe overcome motivational slumps.
Yeah.
You know, because that's inevitable. And this is what I was trying to over and over explain to my friend's girlfriend when we were having our discussion is, you know, motivation's great. Like, it gets you moving. But if you think that, like, you're going to be motivated all the time, like, I don't know, like, that's crazy to me.
Yeah.
That's crazy to think you're always going to be motivated. Like, I'm always willing and ready to go to the gym in the morning, but this morning I woke up, it's raining. Mm-hmm. The last thing I wanted to do was get up and go to the gym early.
Yeah.
You know, in that weather especially.
Yeah, especially like the winter. That's why a lot of people this time they don't work out. Well, maybe it's getting a little warmer now, but you know, February you get the seasonal depression. Nobody wants to do anything. You know, so yeah, motivation is crap. Yeah, I'm sorry, but it is. You know what I mean? It's just it's not going to last, and you got to have the discipline to get past it and get your processes, and you start falling in love with those processes. You know?
Yeah, and that's one thing that I often tell people too is like, and that I put into practice is I try not to think about like the end goal. I try not to think about the result. I try to just think about the process because I think there's so much to be learned during whatever the process is. Whether your goal is whether it's in the gym to gain 10 pounds, whether it's, you know, your job, you want to get promoted in 10, 12 months, whatever it is, what's the process to get you there? And think about the process. Think about the daily tasks and, you know, initiatives that you need to complete, you know, along the way to get there. And what I tell people is that, you know, you don't think about the goal because that eventually you follow through during the process. The goal, the end result's going to be waiting for you. It's just there.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I think you got to have the goal. That's what gets you going. I mean, you're always going to have it on the horizon and just as your North Star, as your compass, right? But after a while, I think you start to fall in love with the process. But you definitely got to have that goal as your motivation to start, like you talked about earlier.
Yep.
And then after a while, you do just fall in love with the process. And then ultimately you reach your goal. You're like, holy crap, I'm here. But then what always happens? You reach the finish line. What happens?
What next?
Yeah, well, you immediately you're like, because
What's
you
your
just
next goal?
you love what you're doing. You're like, this is great.
The process has been great, and what's the next? What's the next journey that I'm going to put myself on? I've set this goal. I've smashed it. What's now? What?
Yep.
Especially a competitive person is going to think that way. But what I do say is, like I said, I tell people to think about the process. I tell people to fall in love with the process. But when you lose that in the middle, and you're going to that motivation, even that discipline on days you're going to lose it because we're not perfect. So much perfection being put out there online about, you know, I don't miss and I don't shut up. Just I don't believe it. I don't believe that, you know, people don't miss or people whatever are just so fucking perfect. I don't buy into it. You're human, and so what I say now is like, when you do get in those slumps throughout the process, then you can think about the end goal. Think about why you started. Think about it. And then get back to your process and start to just keep crushing it. Right?
And then if you do fall off, though, like kind of all I got thinking about is, and you see this all the time, when people fall off of what they've been doing, especially they've been doing so good for so long, is they literally, it's all or nothing. Oh, no, I've messed up, so it's all gone. Like, no, man, like start picking it back up piece by piece again if you need to. But, you know, it's not all for nothing. And that seems to be like a human character trait, I think. A lot of people are like, oh man, I messed up.
Well, and that's when you start to think about why you started.
Yeah.
Why did you even start on this journey to begin with? Why did you create this process? And that's what I tell myself when I'm starting to like slip. I'm like, okay, like even with this podcast, like sometimes I doubt myself. Like, you know, I post episode 1 and then 2 and then whatever, and then I'm like, start to self doubt. Yeah. But then I think to myself, why did I start this? What got my ass out of the chair to get myself moving?
Yep.
And now I need to remain disciplined to make sure I'm delivering what I promised I was going to deliver to myself.
Yep.
How it's received is not up to me, but if I do what I'm supposed to do and I follow my process, that's what it's about. And that's how I approach not just this, but everything. That's how I approach everything. But in like, yeah, I research all these topics and everything before we talk about them. But one of the things that, I was researching was, strategies, right? What are some strategies that you can implement, to cultivate motivation and discipline and put these things into action? And that this isn't like a marketing scheme or anything, but what I came up with is our 4 key principles. If you implement those things, I think if you use the 4 things that we talk about, setting standards, then which is ultimately deciding what's acceptable, what's not. For example, when you're setting a standard, what's acceptable, what isn't. That goes into everything, right? You don't like the way you look, you don't like the way you feel. Maybe you need to get in the gym. You don't like where you're at professionally. Maybe it's time to explore other options. You're not happy in your relationship. Maybe it's time to reevaluate that. But you set standards for yourself in every single thing that you do, every aspect of your life, and that's where it starts, in my opinion. And that's why I kind of set that. When we called this Be the Standard, it was like, that's the first thing you got to do is set a standard for yourself.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, if you can't define that, if you have not set that, I guess that's a perfect way to put it. Then is that you don't. It's what you're gonna fall back on, right? Hey, this is the minimum. Like, this is the standard I set for myself. This is who I am, and that's, you start building evidence to support that, right? Yeah. So, I love that. It's good.
Yeah, and then after that, you start saying, okay, these are the standards I've set for myself. Now, what are the habits that I can create? Mm-hmm. That's why I made that the second one. What are the goals that you're going to set for yourself? What one of the things that you need to do, when creating habits for yourself, or one of the habits is obviously setting goals, but practicing time management, and ultimately your habits and the things that you enact every single day and put into practice, that's going to dictate your level of discipline.
Yep.
And that ultimately dictates your ability to deliver results or drive results. So if you can enact the proper habits, you can drive results.
Yep, absolutely.
is how I look at it. And then, our third principle, that this is also a great one, execution, right? Execute. What does that mean, right? It means you do what you say you're going to do. It means you keep the promise you make to yourself.
I love that.
Right? Because when you're doing these things, when you're setting a goal for yourself and you're really chasing something, you're entering into a contractual agreement with yourself. You're telling yourself that you're going to do something. You're telling yourself you want something so bad that I'm going to go get it. And these are just the steps that kind of help you get there, right?
Yep. So
that's my favorite one too. Is
I love that. I just like the way you put it. It was really cool. You know what I mean? Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and if you're dependent on motivation all the time, you won't keep your promises to yourself. And if you can't keep your promises to yourself, you probably can't keep your promises to anything.
No, of course not.
Because it starts and I want to make that point clear to everybody listening is regardless of what it is you're looking to do or looking to accomplish, you can't do any of it until you start with yourself and yourself is in order. And that's why I say it takes time. I said this, I think, episode 2 or 3 or whatever it was. It takes time. You got to start putting in these habits and setting these standards for yourself now. And then in good time, you can start focusing on, driving those results through discipline and keeping the promises you make to yourself.
Yeah. And it just goes back to what I think we started off with. I kind of went on a tangent about it, is like starting with one thing, right? Mm-hmm. Keeping that promise to yourself, make it just one thing and just do it over and over and over and over again until it becomes a trait. Like, I know it takes a long time to become a trait. So something, you keep that promise, it becomes a habit, right? Mm-hmm. And then you can maybe work another one in, and then another one. But most people, unless you're, one of the outliers, that's how you got to do it. You got to do one at a time. And when you start keeping that promise to yourself, like you talked about, you start to really believe in it, and that just becomes who you are, and you'll hold that long term, and the discipline I think you're building that foundation of discipline by doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think our 4 key principles tie into just discipline and driving results. And the last one, which I made our 4th key principle, is accountability. And what that is ultimately is it's the ability, we've talked about this in the past, to recalibrate and reassess. And that's the only way, that's the best way to be accountable to yourself. And it is to constantly be taking a step back, look at yourself. Am I doing the right things? Am I doing the right, am I enacting the right habits and all of those things? So I think to recalibrate and reassess, it doesn't get more simple of a strategy to kind of hold yourself accountable.
Yeah.
And in addition to that is just maybe more important or just as important is being honest with yourself. You're the one that has to look in the mirror every day and know what you're looking at and who you're looking at. And, I think that if you're not taking a step back and looking at yourself, you're not going to change.
Yeah. I just don't want to lose.
And you're not going to stay on top of your habits.
Yeah. It's easy to lie to yourself, right? Because we can change the narrative on the fly. So I think it is good. Something you might have talked about or not, I don't remember, but is really capturing, like, write it down. Like, this is who I am. Literally write out who you say you are, and it kind of holds you accountable to yourself. Because if you can tell yourself a narrative in the head and you only think, you say, in my mind, I am this person. And that can easily be swayed by the other voice in your head later on. But I feel like you sit down deliberately, not emotionally, just deliberately, and write down, all right, this is who I am. Like you talked about earlier, this is my plan to get there. And then you map it out, and then you get there. But then you're always going to look back and say, this is what I promised to myself. This is who I said I was going to be. Because your mind can definitely mess with you and be like, oh, you didn't really say that, or you said this, and kind of change the story on you,
Yeah, and I'm glad you made that point about writing it down, because I would encourage, write down everything.
Yeah.
Write down all of your goals. Write down all of these key principles and how you expect to follow them, and your habits and all these habits you want to enact. Write it all down.
So literally just use, like, not to cut you off, but just because you talk about the 4 key principles, write those out and then start writing below those.
But I have them in my phone.
Yeah, I know you do.
I have all that stuff in my phone, and that's where I was going with that, is write it all down.
Yeah.
That's it. Then you have tangible evidence in text.
Yep.
This is what I told myself I was going to do.
Yep.
I didn't do that. I need to get my shit together.
But what if you do? And also, that's a good point too.
If you do what?
Say you start doing those things you said you do, or you mapped out what you're gonna do. Just write that down too. Like, hey, I succeeded on this, and you're building that against that evidence towards that goal, towards that identity that you're creating for yourself.
Yeah, mark it off somehow in there. Done, and then add to it.
Yeah,
add to it.
Yep.
But yeah, no, I think that's so important. And the last point I'll make about that is, because we just discussed a little bit about, the time it takes and this and that. I have a timeline in my head of 12 to 18 months. I think in 12 to 18 months, and maybe that's not enough, but I think that's probably, at least for me, that's been a good timeline to basically just flip the script on so many key things that I wanted to change. And I think that, I think that's a reasonable timeline and goal to set for yourself, to enact habits, to make real tangible change that you can really put into practice.
I mean, if you can do 12 to 18 months, you're doing probably better than 99% of the world. Obviously the 1%ers, they're extremely good and very successful because they can do 10, 20-year plans and they can go after it. You can literally sustain a year and a half plan. That's excellent. And
that takes a lot of that discipline of delayed gratification.
Yep.
But what's 12 to 18 months in the grand scheme of 80, 90, whatever years you're going to live, right? And that can change you forever.
Yeah. But just to kind of go full circle, what you talked about earlier today, in the beginning of this is, if you had X, Y, and Z, you did that every day for 2 weeks and you got $1 million, you do it. Now, if I gave you the same X, Y, and Z and told you to do that for 10 years, would you do it? Probably not. You know what I mean? Well, you would. But for the everyday
person, they wouldn't believe you. They wouldn't have the faith that you talked about.
They wouldn't have the faith, or even if you told them a year, they probably wouldn't execute on it. They would start like, oh yeah, and then once they don't see any feedback from it whatsoever, they would quit.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I think we hit that topic pretty good today
think
with
we got it,
motivation,
yeah.
discipline.
I think Rip
know,
Rip agrees.
Rip is killing it right now.
Yeah.
He's relax, buddy, huh?
Yeah, to make an appearance.
Yeah. But final thoughts, I'd say that, use motivation as a vehicle to get you going, and then use discipline as a tool to keep you going and ultimately drive, the end results that you're looking for. Motivation will not sustain you long term, but discipline will. So create those habits, enact, those key principles that we discuss all the time. You'll see me post over and over. It's in our logo. Go look at it if you need a reminder. But I think that's a solid formula, is that setting standards, creating habits, execution, and accountability equals discipline. I really believe that. And I really hope that we can get people to buy into that, because I know for myself, and I've used it, it works. So with that, I'd like to thank, as we wrap up here, our sponsors. Our sponsors are Thin Blue Ride. My buddy John Dage, he's a Worcester police officer, Army veteran. That's his 501c3. And go check him out, thinblueride.org. It's an organization that ultimately, what their goal is, they provide financial relief for veterans, first responders, and their families, so that they can focus on cancer treatment and all of that entails, as opposed to having to deal with strictly just the financial burdens of battling cancer.
Such a great guy doing great things out there.
Yeah, no, John's doing great things. So really just honor kind of to be sponsoring him and having him be a part of what we're looking to accomplish here. He'll be a guest as well.
Love it, man.
He will be a guest.
Looking forward to that
one. So yeah, absolutely. Also, special thank you as always to my childhood buddy Jeff Bolte. He's been huge in producing this podcast, getting the sound right, getting the video right. He's just huge and such an integral part of everything that we're looking to accomplish. His company, you see it at the on our canvas as well, Claris Multimedia. Check them out for anything that you might need in that arena. But yeah, no, thanks. And as always, we appreciate your support. There's a million podcasts out there. You could be watching or listening to any of those, and you're here with us. So we very much appreciate it.
Yeah, it's the best.
Yeah, thanks so much. Keep coming with the feedback. We want this interactive. But yeah, again, thanks, guys. And we will see you next time.
Be the standard.
That's right.